I always say that ETFs are the best way for most people to passively invest for the long term. But I also know that there are over 2,000 different ETFs to choose from, which can be a bit hard for beginners to, pick. So today, I'll be talking through 4 of the most popular ETFs out there, ranked by how much money people have actually invested in them. Usually I would say don't invest into something just because other people are investing in it, but in my opinion, this is a pretty good starting point. Having a portfolio of just these 4 ETFs would do most people pretty good. Starting off with by far the most popular ETF out there, which is SPY. This ETF tracks the S&P 500, which is the 500 leading companies listed in the US. So most people see this index as the best way for you to gauge how well the US stock market is doing. And because the US stock markets has just grown to become so big, it's also a pretty good gauge of how well global equities are doing in general. It is so popular that the 3 largest ETFs out there all track the same index, which is the S&P 500. Obviously, I won't talk about each one of them individually. You can always go for VOO, IVV, you can go for any other ETFs that tracks the S&P 500. I only mentioned SPY in this video because they are the largest of those 3 at an asset under management of nearly $500 billion. In terms of returns, this ETF has been doing really well. This year alone, in 2024, it's already up by more than 10%. And the more crazy thing is, over the last 10 years, the average return for this ETF is more than 12%, which is pretty crazy. This means that, if you invested $10,000 10 years ago and you never invested any more money since then, today, the value of that ETF would be over $33,000. Now let's look a bit deeper into this ETF. So the biggest sector that's holding right now is technology at around 30%, but it's also pretty well balanced with other sectors like healthcare and financial services as well. So this diversification is really important because let's say one day if technology stocks start doing badly, at least the other sectors can sort of counterbalance that. We saw this play out really well in 2021 and 2022, and we're seeing this happen right now as well. So there's another ETF in this list of the top 4 most popular ones. That one is a lot more concentrated into technology, and I'll show you guys an example later on about how that impacts that portfolio when the markets start to go down. Anyway, looking at the region allocation, obviously since this ETF tracks the 500 leading companies in the US, it's obvious that then most of their money will be invested into the US. But even within that, if we take a deeper look into it, we can see that a lot of the companies listed in this ETF, they actually make quite a bit of money outside of the US. For example, if we look at Apple, only 36% of their revenue comes from the US, and the other 64% comes from other countries like China, Europe, rest of the world, even Malaysia, right? So yeah, we can see that even though these are American companies listed in the US, where they get their money from, it's pretty diverse. It comes from all over the world. So investing into this ETF means that you're investing into 500 different companies, but your main holdings will be the big names like Microsoft, Google, Tesla, and Berkshire Hathaway. So personally, I do think that this ETF is so popular for a good reason. I mean, for one, you will be invested into the 500 best companies in the world. Well, not the world, but listed in the US. And most of the best companies in the world list in the US anyway. But let's say even if one of those 500 companies start doing poorly, the ETF will automatically rebalance. It will kick the company out and will add it in with another company that is doing slightly better. Even for my own personal portfolio, right now, most of my money is invested into an ETF like this, and I even know some people who are fully invested into just this single ETF. By the way, if you guys want to invest into any of these ETFs, then you will need a broker. Moomoo just launched in Malaysia, and in my opinion, they're a pretty good option for Malaysians. This is because they have a pretty good user platform, so it's very intuitive, it's easy to use. Their fees, they are really low, and they also have a lot of information that they share with you guys. So a lot of the screenshots I get for this video, it actually came from the Moomoo app. They're also running a promo right now where if you deposit 500 ringgit, you will get 100 ringgit worth of cash vouchers. And if you deposit 10,000 ringgit by the 15th of May 2024, you'll get a chance to spin a wheel and win a random share. The grand prize for that is an Nvidia share that's worth over $700 as of today. And even if you're unlucky, you will still get something like a Grab share. I think that's the lowest valued one. It's worth $3. It's nowhere near as good as $700. But hey, maybe one day Grab will be a tech giant. Maybe if you hold on to it and all of us keep ordering from Grab food, maybe one day Grab will be worth $500 a share as well. Anyway, if you guys want to sign up, use my link. I'll leave it down below. Let's move on to the second most popular ETF out there. So while the SPY covers the 500 leading companies in the US, this next ETF covers the entire US stock market, and it trades with the ticker symbol VTI. So this is for those of you who want a bit more exposure towards small and medium companies as well. So while I say small and medium companies, I'm not talking about SMEs. I'm not talking about your mom and pop shops that sell retail stuff or anything like that. These are actually companies that are big as well in their own right. They're worth billions of dollars. They're just not big enough to be in the top 500 in the US. And this is the main difference between SPY and VTI. With SPY, you'll be holding 500 different companies. With VTI, you'd be invested into nearly 3,600 different companies. So your main holdings will still be the same names. You'll still be invested into the Apples and the Facebooks of the world, but you'll also get a small allocation. I would say you get around an 11% allocation towards medium and smaller sized companies. So returns wise, it's pretty similar to the SPY. It's just slightly lower over the last 10 years. The average is 12.28%, but that's still very, very good. So in my opinion, since this ETF is so similar to the SPY, you just have to choose one. So if you're someone who only wants to invest in large companies, go for SPY. If you're someone who wants a bit more broad diversification, you want smaller companies, medium-sized companies, then you can go for VTI. I don't really think you need both. You can have both if you want. I just don't really think you need it. In terms of its top holdings, in terms of its top sectors, in terms of the regions that it's invested in, they are pretty much the same. Now we get to the ETFs that are slightly different from each other, and the third most popular one is the QQQ, which tracks the Nasdaq 100. So this covers the 100 largest companies that are listed in the Nasdaq exchange in the US. The thing is, most companies that are listed on the Nasdaq exchange, they're actually tech companies, which basically means this QQQ, it's a tech ETF with some diversification. So we can see this in their sector breakdown. With the SPY, like I shared earlier, they have around 30% invested into tech, but with the QQQ, they take it a step further with nearly 50% invested into technology companies. In terms of holdings, it's pretty much the same names. It's the Apples, Facebooks, all those companies, but instead of diversifying to other stuff like banks, you pretty much get much more concentrated into these big tech companies. And because of this, the past performance of this ETF is pretty insane. For those of you who don't know, over the last 10 years or so, it's been an extremely good period of time for US tech companies. So investing into this ETF over the last 10 years, the average return is over 18% per year. That's crazy. I shared earlier that 10,000 ringgit invested into the SPY 10 years ago would be worth 33,000 ringgit today. So that's a lot of money. That's a pretty good return. Most people would be happy with that. But the same 10,000 ringgit invested into the QQQ instead 10 years ago today would be worth 55,000 ringgit. That is a really big difference. Just last year, in 2023 alone, the QQQ went up by more than 54%. That is crypto level kind of returns in my opinion. It's really crazy and it has been performing so well. But of course, there are drawbacks to investing into this ETF that you need to take note of. For one, past performance doesn't indicate future performance. Just because it did well over the last 10 years doesn't mean it will do well in the next 10 years. Another thing is the same reason that this ETF has been doing so well, basically because it's so concentrated into tech, that same thing can lead to poor returns in the future. Let me explain. So like I was talking about earlier in this video, when technology companies start to sell off, this QQQ ETF, most of the times it will do a lot worse than other ETFs like SPY and VTI. So the reason for this is that, let's say tech companies sell down, at least SPY and VTI, they have allocation towards financial services, towards healthcare as well, that will help counteract that. Whereas QQQ, it's very heavily, very concentrated into tech, so it will suffer the most. Let me give you guys an example. As of the time I'm recording this video, the entire US stock market is going through sort of a mini correction, and over the last 5 days, SPY is down by 3.9%, which is pretty big actually. It's a pretty big down move. But if we look at the QQQ, it's down nearly double that at 6.2%. So yeah, this ETF is for those of you who, one, you think that technology will continue being the leader and will continue doing extremely well over the next few years. And two, it's also more for people who, who want to take on more risks, knowing that the drawdowns can be very bad. I think in 2021, 2022, this ETF actually went down by around 40, maybe nearly 50%. So yeah, if you want to invest in this, just make sure you take note of it. Because it can go up by so much, it also means that it can go down by quite a bit as well. So do take note of that before investing your money. Moving on, so the first three ETFs I talked about today, they all mainly cover US stocks. But this fourth most popular ETF in the world right now, this one is taking a completely different approach. It covers all developed markets except the US. So this ETF trades with the ticker symbol VEA and it has an asset under management of $125 billion. So if you want diversification from the first 3 ETFs that I was talking about earlier in this video, then this one is a pretty good choice for you. Finally, when we look at the region breakdown, we will see a difference. We won't just see 100% into the US. This ETF, like I said, it doesn't cover the US at all, which means the top country in this ETF is Japan, followed by the United Kingdom and Canada. And it's not only the region that differs, it's also the sectors. With this one, the biggest sector allocation is towards financial services. Finally, we had to go through like 4 different ETFs before we found one that isn't pretty much all into tech. So the reason for this is that tech companies, they have been doing well, but most of the tech companies that we know, they're all listed in the US. So when we start investing outside of the US, we will see very different companies. We will see industrials, healthcare, and financial services that I was talking about. There are tech companies outside the US, of course, but they're just not as big, which means that this ETF, technology, is only the 3rd largest sector. And because of this, the top holdings are also very different. We will finally not see Apple, Microsoft, Google, all those names. The largest companies in this ETF, you'll start to see names like Toyota, Nestle, and even Louis Vuitton. So just from this, you can tell by now that the benefit of investing into an ETF like this is that it really gives you diversification, not just from the US, but also from technology companies. So at least one day, if let's say the US or tech companies start to sell off really hard, at least you have this ETF in your portfolio to sort of balance that out. But there are also drawbacks to having this diversification. Because the US has dominated for so long, the returns of this VEA ETF is the lowest out of the 4 that I've talked about today. So this year alone, it's up by 5%, which is actually pretty good. But over the last 10 years, the average returns of this ETF is only at around 5% compared to the crazy double-digit returns of the first 3 ETFs I was talking about. So you can see that this ETF, it really lags behind the other ETFs just because it doesn't hold the big names like Amazon, Tesla, all these names that have been pretty much driving the entire US stock market for the last 5-10 years. Personally though, I do value diversification and I do invest into ETFs like this just for that. Other markets have lagged behind the US for a very long time, I think now 20 years maybe, and I do think that it's about time for them to start catching up. So these are the 4 most popular ETFs in the world ranked by assets under management, which basically means these are the ETFs that most people pour their money into. Like I said earlier in this video though, we don't want to blindly invest into something just because other people are doing it too. But in my opinion at least, these ETFs, they're actually pretty good. Just make sure you do at least a bit of research and you understand these ETFs a bit before you start dumping your money. So if any of you guys want to invest into ETFs, then like I said, check out Mumu Malaysia. It's a really good option. Deposit 10,000 ringgit by the 15th of May 2024 and stand a chance to win an Nvidia share worth $760 as of today. If you're someone who is not from Malaysia, they can also check out Interactive Brokers. They are my favorite global broker out there. Their fees are even lower. The only thing for Malaysians is that they are not regulated here in Malaysia. Anyway, thanks for watching this video to the end, guys. Give us a huge thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. See you guys in the next one. Peace out.